We're rolling.
Rolling.
Chip Richards, welcome back to Soma.
Thank you, Peter.
It's great to have you back. I feel like I know you so well. I was just saying off camera, I've only actually met you once, and it was probably for half an hour, but I feel like I know you so well already. I've been really enjoying learning about you and your career to date. And so I thought I'd just take a moment before we go any further, because I have so many questions which I'd like to ask you, but just to give the listeners a bit of an idea of your career to date. So you can jump in at any time, correct me if I
looking forward to this.
But Chip started off as an athlete, as a skier, was on a trajectory towards the Olympics. I think you were number one in America at your particular, was it freestyle skiing? So on track for the Olympics, and one day you went, did a jump, landed the jump, knee explosion. You spent time in recovery, got back, went up another jump, other knee explosion. And so you went from there to coach. And so from athlete to coach, but there's a lot in that I would like to discuss. Today, well, actually there's a part in the middle, which is you were a writer, and you have you've written screenplays. Is it One Perfect Day? One Perfect Day, yeah. And you also wrote a children's book, which I'm blanking on, which is
Flutes in the Garden.
Flutes in the Garden. Yeah. So you've gone through all these almost various different careers, and today very much you're working with leaders, entrepreneurs, high performers. Executive coaching, I guess is probably the broad term. So we met, as I said, last week through Dan and the team at Regen. So how did you meet Dan and the Regen team?
Yeah, great. Well, firstly, it's a total honor to be here and great to be back. And I can remember our time together a week and a half ago, after that 30 minutes, putting my arm around you and saying, feel like you're a brother. So it's really nice to reconnect and continue our conversation here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
So what brought me here to Soma and into the work that I'm currently doing with Dan Fitzgerald and the Regen Ventures Venture Capital Fund, really it was through a mutual friend of ours, Arne Rubenstein, who runs the Rights of Leadership Institute. And Dan, in his work with founders and inventors of regenerative technology, has realized that as the funder, as one of the funding bodies, one of his greatest gifts that he can give is to be a great coach. So he was looking for a coach that could help him expand as a leader with his team, but also expand how he can coach leaders of startup organizations. So that was our starting place, and then we've had quite a deep, powerful journey together with the Regen team, and then also within the founder community that the Regen team supports. So yeah, it's been super cool.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dive into that whole area as a founder, entrepreneur myself, and connected with a bunch of founders, entrepreneurs. The whole wellness piece, like within that, and the whole balance piece of entrepreneurs is something I'm really interested in, and so I'd love to dive a little bit more into that. But I might take you way back. Oh, not that far back, but back as Chip the athlete.
Yeah, great.
So so talk me through it. So like one of the things that I was thinking about and really had empathy on the story, I was just imagining like a younger kind of Chip who was connected to a vision, passionate, like had this really clear kind of like drive of what he was doing, like heading towards the Olympics. And then, the universe had a different journey for you. Can you just talk me through that period of time and how you were able to, like, how did you feel at that time? How long was that period of time of because you might be able to look at it now and say it's transformational, but at the time, I could imagine it was very challenging, almost the innermost cave element to that. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that, how that was a like an inflection point, and just understand your experience there.
Yeah, great.
It shaped you.
It's a good place to start. And it's true. I mean, I can look back now, which seems in some ways lifetimes ago, but also just kind of one moment ago. And the events that that kind of ended my path as an athlete and opened up the path that I've been on now for the last 25 years. At the time, it was the biggest crisis I had experienced on all levels of my being. And strangely now I can look back and it's almost like the most poetic thing that ever could have happened. With just enough power in it to really shake me away from what I thought I was supposed to be doing into a path which has ultimately opened up to be much deeper and more profound for me. And I think, so yeah, as you said, I was a competitive freestyle skier, and I was ranked number 1 in the US for the sport. And I definitely moved through a lot of layers of technical focus, but the kind of final years of my work as an athlete was really deeply more around the inner shifts that had to happen in order for me to be my best in the moments that mattered the most. And it was something I got really fascinated with as an athlete. And I noticed as an athlete that if I could make a little bit of a shift on my internal makeup, it had the capacity to make a quantum shift in my results or how I showed up. And so this was a place I was really fascinated in. And as you know, as an athlete, and this actually might ultimately circle back to the wellness conversation, right? I think something that's beautiful about sport is that it is one arena that where we are challenged every day to go beyond what we did yesterday, every day to go beyond what we thought was possible, every day to kind of be on the leading edge of our own existence in a way. And I think it's something that we miss, like we fall asleep to a lot in normal life, and in business life, we can get caught up in quite a rhythm of life that puts that edge to sleep a little. So it's something I love and loved about being an athlete was there was always a place to go. And I think what was missing for me at the young age, which I see now in a lot of leaders, is the fine line between pushing or stretching far enough to go beyond my comfort zone, but in a way to do it in a way without blowing up. So and the line is quite fine between going like to my outer limit and then like literally one step or one like kilometer per hour faster, and it goes from being peak to explosion. And it's amazing how one of the gifts of my own personal injuries was it gave me what seems to be a lifelong attunement to that thin line, right? Of how to stretch and continue going beyond what I thought was possible, but to do it in a way that doesn't blow myself or my relationships or my company up in the process. But coming back to your question, when I the first big injury that I had was a great, like for many athletes, it was just a test. It was like, yeah, okay, that's just an obstacle. It's going to make me push harder.
How old were you then?
I was 20. Yeah, and so the recovery at that time for that level of injury was about 9 months, and I was just, it just made me hungrier, and I came back the next year and sort of regained my ranking, and I just felt stronger and more confident, and was just, and then when the second injury happened, it was interesting because I didn't fall on either of them. There wasn't like a big mistake. There wasn't like a big, it wasn't obvious. Yeah. And so, and particularly with the second one, it just left me in a little place of questioning, like why a little bit like why did this happen? And but I did this surgery and kind of came back with the same amount of fierceness and was ready to go back out again. And my surgeon actually just paused me. And I can still remember sitting in the office with him, and he said, look, you're strong. This was my last appointment with him. And he was like, you're stronger now actually than when I met you 2 years ago. But I have to be honest, like if you keep going like you're going, you're going to come back to see me again. And I can't guarantee that the timing of that will be, your choosing. Yeah. And it was enough to make me just pause and And in that pause, I decided to take one season off. And that was it was a bit of an innermost cave period for me, because for the first time, I started to, in a little while, unravel my identity and my sense of value and my sense of worth and all of these things that had been so tightly woven to my performance as an individual. And they started to just unravel a little bit. And so there was a big open space there. And I think the gift for me, as we might touch on, what often comes in the innermost cave is, when I was kind of at that most vulnerable place, my coach at the time said, "Why don't you come and coach with me for the season? And you can train hard, and you can be amongst all of your peers, but you just don't have to push as hard. And then come back next year, and you can." And it was just enough to kind of go, "Oh, okay, I'll do that. I can stay close to my competition. I can spy on them, and I'll be ready next year." And quite literally, just that first morning of the very first day coaching, it was like a little all of the angst and the kind of frustration of losing what felt like my dream. It just kind of started to dissolve, and from that came like a little spark of a new possibility. And I could feel really right from the beginning, wow, this is something about this coaching feeling in my body that just feels like home. And and by the end of that season, I wasn't even thinking about competing anymore. I was just moving in that direction.
So what do you think it was about coaching? Like, if you had to put it into words?
I think maybe for me specifically, I think as an athlete, I was never like a fierce athlete. Like I was never like fiercely competitive. I was fierce about all the aspects of training and everything, but I wasn't like a elbows out, knock my competitors over guy. Yeah. And I always had an interest in how my other team members were doing and stuff. And so there was something about moving from an athlete, which is by its nature quite a self-centered pursuit, kind of has to be, to being a coach is kind of the opposite. You're suddenly you're performing, or your expression is through others, and it's really in service of others. And I just found it felt really natural in me to be more connected to how other people are doing. And I felt like I got the same buzz if an athlete just made a little breakthrough that I used to get if I was on the top of the podium, but that little buzz just stayed with me. It didn't, it wasn't like, as an athlete, you might win a race, but then the next day you're nervous and whereas as a coach, I just felt much more content.
It's really interesting listening to you talk about this. So when you were an athlete, do you think you were more aligned with intrinsic goals rather than extrinsic goals? I'm just interested, were you more interested in because I speak to a lot of competitors or a lot of successful people, and I look at like the drivers and like what's motivating them. And, the gold standard really is, people driven by these kind of values that are intrinsic to themselves. They're, about getting better and being a better athlete rather than the fame, money or rewards and the public perception. Like, were you more intrinsically driven even as an athlete, and did that help you transfer into a coach, you think?
Yeah, I think actually there was a point where that shift kind of happened. And I think because freestyle skiing is a judge sport, it's really easy to finish your run or your jump, and then you're looking to the judges to see, how did I do? So you're very externally focused by nature because you're being scored. Yeah. And then it can be quite confusing because you felt great, but the judges didn't see it. And then you're kind of confused, like, well, hang on, that actually felt good, but in last place here, how do those things marry? And so for a while, I found myself, when I was younger, I was always chasing the results to validate how I was feeling. And then I can't remember what age, but one year, I just kind of realized it was like a futile exercise. And the way I was feeling was completely being dictated by the judges. And so I kind of changed. I started a different habit. And what I did was I would finish my run, and I would I would just go right down to the chairlift, and I would get on the chairlift, and I would just take 10 minutes just to sit quietly and think about it and decide for myself how I felt about it, and kind of get a sense of the intrinsic connection to what had just happened, and get to peace about it. And then I would go talk to my coach and get his kind of reflections. How did I do compared to, the aspects of not only my performance, but the kind of my inner edge that I was trying to push. And then once I'd had those two check-ins, then I would go look at my score and see how I was. And it was interesting. That little decision, it changed not only how I felt, but actually starting kind of that season, my results started getting a lot better. But I wasn't thinking about it as much, which was really interesting.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about with jiu-jitsu. So I've been involved in martial arts from a kid, various different ones. I got into jiu-jitsu later in life. I'm 42 now. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for like the last 3 years. When I first started, after the first kind of year, I started being interested in the competitions and like wanting to compete. And I feel like my jiu-jitsu actually kind of stalled like in my like general broader understanding of it, because I was so focused on doing certain things that I knew could get points and win. So for example, like little takedowns, or like get up on the scoreboard, that you could win matches, instead of like understanding some of the core fundamentals of jiu-jitsu, like being in a bad position and escaping. So like when I was practicing, I was terrible at that type of stuff, but you put me in a competition, like I won the Australian Nationals by basically doing like a collar drag and getting on top and like winning by points. Yeah. But I felt like my jiu-jitsu wasn't actually improving. So this year, I've come back from injury, but I was like, okay, I'm not even going to think about competing. You get to compete every day. That's the beauty about jiu-jitsu, like on the mats in training. But I wanted to actually like learn the fundamentals and just try and get that scoreboard, like that winning and losing mentality, which is like my own, like, stuff like out of the way. Yeah. A little bit.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I can resonate with that deeply in several areas of my life. I think, and what I like about what I'm hearing from you is that it feels like, it's you're still going for the result, right? When you get back in there, you're still going to, aim to win the match. Yeah. But I know when I'm oriented that way, kind of from the inside out, there's a power in my movement. And this can be in sport, or this can be in anything I'm doing, if I'm giving a talk or whatever, that if I'm really oriented on the sort of the inner elements of that, there's just a power there that just is never there if I'm just thinking about the technique and the agenda or the whatever, right? Yeah. So I think you'll be even more dangerous when you come back from your injury.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm getting better. So let's keep going with the idea of the athlete to coach. So you got into coaching, and then you were connected with the Australian national team, I believe. Yeah. So how did that come about, and what was that?
Yeah, I think it was, and this is it's a little bit related to this question around intrinsic versus extrinsic. I didn't have a big extrinsic goal as a coach. I was just following the energy of it, and it felt good for the first season, felt really good for the second season, and because I still had kind of one foot in the competitor space, and half of my brain was still a competitor. I think I had a unique perspective. I was very connected to the athletes. I really understood their world. I wasn't kind of approaching it from sitting at the bottom of the hill with a coffee mug and a big coat. I was right there with them. And so it just kind of kept opening. And by the end of the second season, I got an invitation to come down here for one season. And it was a bit of a trial period to do some work with the national team. And for me, it was like a free ticket to Australia. I thought, why not? I'll go down there. They'll pay for my flights. I'll make a bit of money. And I actually brought my bicycle, and I rode my bike through Indonesia for a couple months. And then I came here, and I was just going to do the season. And then I was going to start riding west. And I told my family and my friends, I'll be back in about a year. And that was like 29 years ago. So
sounds familiar, actually.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, in the first sort of 6 months of being here, two things happened. I guess the initial sort of one season gig opened up into a full-time head coach Olympic opportunity, and then and during that time I also met and married my wife. So yeah, I think I still have a few friends in the U.S. that are like, when's Chip coming back from his trip?
Yes.
But I've been here. We've been here mostly since then, and so I guess, when I said it sort of feels like poetry to look back to the injury, none of those things would have, my whole life really, the last 20, 30 years has been as a result of that. And part of that was being able to take the Australian team to the Olympics. And so to, in a way, fulfill what was a lifelong dream for me as an athlete, but to do it through the lens of a coach, which I think for whatever reason was more meaningful for my bigger journey, So, yeah.
I can imagine though, that period of time you blow your unit, that would have been incredibly challenging emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, how did you cope with that? And I guess if you had to go back, because I had a similar period where I had ill health, and it transported me like into where I am today. And I think about like, okay, if I had to go back and coach, that Peter, like, how would I do it? If you had to go back and coach that younger Chip, like what would the advice be to that younger Chip?
Yeah, great. Well, there's a coach to younger Chip moment. I actually think about, which is pre-injury, which is a little, might be more interesting to start anyway. Because one of the things that when I think back on that period, and actually the mornings of both of the days I had injuries, on both of those days, if I think back and I'm honest, I can, the public story is I didn't have a big fall. It just happened. I don't know how it happened. I just had this injury. But if I'm really honest with myself, on both of those mornings, there was a quiet part of me that was literally like a quiet voice saying, take it easy today. Yeah. And that was not a common voice. And so I can remember it quite clearly. But at the time, with your coaches, your coach and your rankings and your parents are all there and the sponsors and whatever else, there's so many voices that are louder that, at the time I didn't even consider listening to that quiet voice. But I think the fact that I didn't, when I listen now, or when I look back now, I think it's really informed a lot of the way I've coached, and even the way I keep an eye on my own well-being. Is I'm a lot more available to hear those quiet pulses when they come, to back off or to lean in further or whatever. And I think as an athlete, sometimes the risk is you just override everything for the outcome. Yeah.
Is there any particular tools that you would recommend? Is there anything you would do to be able to tune more into that, or quiet in certain times? Is there any specific tools that you'd think about?
I think, sort of for athletes and for coaches that I work with now, one of the recommendations that I have is to practice that. I think it's not, we practice a lot of technical stuff, and we practice a lot of like concentration to deliver, but we don't practice a lot of tune into what my quiet voice is saying and go right when normally I go left and see what happens. I don't think we practice trusting that part of us and then looking at what the result was. So that's one thing. Is just kind of start to introduce it in a very quantitative way. What would it look like? What are the messages you're giving yourself this morning about how to take on this day, and how can you respond?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like the basis of mindfulness, really, like acknowledging, like connecting to acknowledging the emotions that are coming up. I guess it's challenging for someone who is elite athlete, high performer, executive, when some of those emotions that are coming up are like either fear or telling you not to do something, or like, and so I think, as you were saying, you kind of just like downplayed that and moved on, because acknowledging some of those emotions actually can be very challenging.
Totally. I think it's a super, super important distinction, because I think, so on one hand, we need to be able to listen to that quiet voice that's saying back off. But then on another hand, if we're on the leading edge of what we're doing, whether it's in business or whether it's in sport or a relationship that we're diving into, we're going to hit the edge of our known reality at some stage. And when we take a step over that, it's going to start to feel uncomfortable just because of the nature of moving into new territory. And so there is a difference, isn't there, between just listening to the quiet voice and listening to what might be a basic survival instinct that's coming up because I'm uncomfortable because I'm in a new territory. And maybe it's okay that I'm in that new territory, but I might get signals then too. Yeah. So how do we distinguish between what is just like a fear that's surfacing and an intuitive impulse? This is a dance, right?
Yeah. So I mean, you said the magic word there, fear. You operated in a sport where, I guess, for the average layman looking on, would look like the scariest, most fearful thing, going up, doing crazy jumps and backflips and doing all these different things. Like for the layperson or the executive or just the mum and dad or whoever's listening to this now, how did you manage fear in those circumstances? How did you manage it as an athlete? How did you manage it as a coach? And do you have any tools or techniques or processes that might be helpful for people that come across fear in everyday lives?
Yeah, great question. Because I think it's easy to think, when you look at extreme sports or something, you think, oh, those guys must be fearless, But for me, that was not true, right? And maybe it was when I was younger, but once you've had a couple big falls and you have those playing over in your head over and over, fear becomes a factor. And I can remember in aerials in particular, I had a couple really big falls, and there was a period, actually the last few years of my endeavor in that space, every morning before the first jump of the day, I had an immense amount of fear. And it didn't matter what if my ranking was great. It didn't matter if I was on my home turf. It didn't matter if the sun was shining. I would just get this like build up. And the tool that I discovered really by example, or I stumbled in it just by doing it, is something I think I actually still apply now when fear comes up, whether it's with surfing or whether I'm getting ready to go out and talk to a bunch of people and I'm really nervous about it. I can remember I was sidestepping the landing hill of the jump hill, something the athletes do before they go and jump in the beginning of the day, or they did back then. And I was just getting so like tight and nervous, and my coach wasn't there, and I was just like squirming. And I'd had a friend who'd gone off this jump site and had broken her back. And so every time I got up to the top of the hill, I was looking down, I just was seeing her last jump that I saw. And the thing that helped me the most in that moment, and you pointed to it a moment ago, is I finally got to the place where I couldn't hold it anymore. I was using all of my energy just to kind of try to keep it here. And I literally said to myself, wow, I'm so scared. And I noticed when I said that, I just said it to myself. It was like purging the pressure valve of an oxygen tank or something. It was like, and I noticed right after saying it, there was like a little release. And then I just let myself talk about it a little bit. And I was just talking to myself, but I was like, whoa, and I found myself actually, as soon as I spoke it, I almost even started to laugh about it. Like it left the spiraling place in my mind, and now it was here. It was like in front of me.
Acknowledged it.
Yeah. And then it just created enough space that I could take the first jump. And then once the first jump was done, then I was okay. Yeah. And so that was a tool that I kind of discovered just because I needed it. and it's certainly something I call on, on a regular basis
So,
today.
so mentally calling it out loud.
Mentally,
what
and kind of give myself permission to feel it. I think if we have something that's coming up, if it's uncomfortable, one of our greatest kind of tendencies is to try to not feel it. To go, oh, that's a danger. That's not going to help me win, or that's not going to. But if it's coming up, man, it just wants to come up, and so just to let it come up and to let myself like feel saturated with that feeling for a moment.
Yeah.
And I think the fear of that is that, oh, if I really let this feeling in, what if it doesn't leave? What if I'm stuck in this feeling and then I'm paralyzed?
Yeah.
But in my experience, most of the time when in that kind of scenario, when I voice it, when I allow myself to really feel it, notice where in my body I feel it. Is it like in my belly? Is it, whoa, I feel constricted? And really identify with it. It kind of just, in a way, it sort of dissolves the charge.
Yeah. Because, for me personally, I've suffered with anxiety at different stages of my life. And the catalyst moment, the nadir moment for me was essentially having a panic attack on the Harbour Bridge, and there was post-traumatic stress from that event, like being back in a taxi and even like presenting to groups of people, and even like around like social occasions and stuff like that, just being around. But I've always had that in me, that kind of like nervousness, fear, and I even see it like today in not in this conversation now, but like in the jiu-jitsu, like when we're sat before, like as the classes started, for example, and the teacher's giving the instruction, and my mind is wandering to everything else in the room and what could go wrong, and I'm like, okay, what is the process I need to feel? Like feel what you feel, like knowledge of it. And I guess over the years I've like developed different techniques, and so like when I first started suffering with anxiety, well, I think anxiety has been there. Fear is always been there through different things. But when I first started to being able to acknowledge it, was the first step, and then the second step for me was almost like transforming it. So like creating like a different like framework where I would acknowledge the fear and then flip it, like add like a positive like reframing onto it.
Yeah.
But I feel like the stage that I'm in now, and like this is something that I'm really trying to work on, is not just trying to reframe it, acknowledge it and like utilize it. So not like not trying to like run away from it or pretend it doesn't exist. It's like, okay, where's that energy charge coming from? Where's that fear coming from? And actually utilizing that as an encompassing sense. So we'll see how we go with that.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I love about it particularly is recognizing that fear is energy, right? It's energy. So, and it's a charge that's making you feel uncomfortable because in your mind, it's connected to other events that might have happened in the past or something. And so I think that's maybe why sometimes the sort of a reframe for me can help, but sometimes that gets stuck up here. It's like a conceptual reframe, whereas the feeling feels like it's down here. So how do I, reframe that? And I think just as you described, having the intention to like take that fear and like harness it, go, wow, recognize it and go, wow, there is energy here.
Powerful energy.
I can imagine that's going to be really powerful.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes if I've had a moment of kind of acknowledging and there's a little bit of a discharge of the kind of the fear element, the other thing I often do, and I did back then, was just take a moment of real quiet. And if I can be in the sun, if I can be somewhere where I feel connected to kind of the basic rhythms of life and nature, for me, that has a way of just letting everything settle down to my center, and then I it's like I almost feel like a moment when everything just becomes a bit whole, and I feel like a green light. Okay, I can move now. So taking just going. Okay, I want to transfer this energy. I'm going to give it a few moments to do that. And then okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I just take a beat on that. Yeah. It's a and knowing our listeners and knowing why, we have a lot of people who come through Soma who are suffering with anxiety. Some people suffer with depression. Some all the different people, different things that affect people. So I think that would be definitely a useful tool for people to think about and acknowledge and to utilize. So thank you for that.
So it's a total honor, and I think there those rhythms and those elements they're obvious in sport, right? Where the heat is turned up on the moment, so you can see and feel things. They're just sharper, and you get more immediate feedback. If you're in your center and you move, or if you're not, you get it right away, or your coach shows you on the video replay. Whereas I think in life, it's a bit more murky, and we have these moments, but then we just glide through them, and we don't really recognize always the relationship between, I got really centered before that conversation, and it made a big difference on the conversation. Or I went straight into that conversation. I didn't even think about it, and then the conversation went to shit. We don't always connect the dots like you have to in sport. So I think it's good to talk about it, because it just makes us more aware that actually these moments are happening all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of friends who have come to me and pretty much suffered panic attacks from presentations, like from public speaking, and they're just like racking their brains. Like, I've done thousands of these presentations. Yeah. And then just one day they just couldn't do it. They were just overwhelmed by the thought of it, and it was the catalyst for exposing anxiety from it, and then having to go and do work from it. But yeah, I think public speaking for a lot of people is definitely a fearful.
It's a sharp one.
It's a sharpener.
And I guess a panic attack is kind of like a blown out knee in that space, right? It's a catalytic event to kind of force you to really go, whoa, all right, what is this? What is my path?
Well, that's it. And I think the similarities that we both have is that for you, there was the transition into coach and just really understanding yourself and be able to develop that. For me, like that panic attack and anxiety has just been a tool for me over the last, which has just made me a better person by being able to sit with it and acknowledge it, and be able to, I think, just evolve as a human because of that. Because I think, I look back to my 20s and how I was, there was still anxiety there, but it was just I just headstrong, push through it and used aggression and all of these different tools to counterweight that, so that those fears were just not compounded. And that I don't think I would be a particularly good husband or father or just person around my group of friends today if I was still in that mode. So for me, it's been a blessing.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think, translating a little bit of that over into the business world and leadership and building teams, and parenthood. I think sometimes when things are challenging or when things break down, our immediate response is something's wrong and this is bad. But when we look back, usually those moments are turning points that actually are pretty powerfully positive. And it's an interesting one because we never want to invite challenge or breakdown, but when it comes, it almost always comes with a gift. And so I'm always thoughtful about, well, how do we catalyze the gift without the breakdown?
Yes.
And then also recognize when things get challenging, it's not because something's wrong, it's actually because we're on the edge of something that's right. And if we lean into it and we don't judge it, but we just go, wow, look at all these elements and our eyes are wide open, we have a chance to kind of push through to a different space.
Yeah. Let's keep delving into that, because I think one of the things I was most excited to speak to you about today is that the framework that you've used as a coach is based upon some of the work by Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. And it was definitely an important tool for me as well, as I've started trying to develop this visionary flow framework that I think about. And it has definitely really strong like similarities in that I believe that there's journeys that people go on, and they're generally, for me, like 7 to 10 year journeys. And there's a period where you have to connect to a vision and take action and cross the threshold and, you know, leave the world to the world of the journey and all of this type of stuff. But once you've done that and took action, then you need to be agile. And I think of this idea of bending, not breaking. And that is kind of like the point where I'd love to, again, get your experience and your learnings over the last 10, 15 years of coaching about how you can get people performing and operating at this high level, but not breaking. You know, what are the, I guess a very specific question is, can you, you know, to be, let's take this to like world class, like, can you truly be world class, that focused, that driven, that consistent, and be balanced as a human being?
Well, this is a good question. This question I can say is actually being debated in spheres of elite sport in this country as we speak. There's a new motto or phrase which is being generated certainly inside Winter Olympic sport in Australia, is the whole idea of winning well, and because of the realization that we've gotten really good at building people up to a peak, and in sport particularly getting people right to their pinnacle, but this often comes at a cost, and either it comes at a cost of their long-term longevity and their ability to then run around in the backyard with their kids or pick up their grandkids one day or whatever. So just literally burning out their nervous system, or it might come at the cost of their relationships or their education or a whole bunch of things, right? And there's a couple schools of thought, right? So some will say it's not possible to win well. The truth is, if you want to be the very, very best in the world at something, and you want to go beyond what anybody's ever done in that thing, there's gonna be periods of time where you are way out there on the skinny branches, right? And I do believe this to be true, right? I don't think we can have balance as like this homeostasis, like we're just moving. If we're trying to push the boundaries in something. Yeah. However, I think having a dynamic sense of flow in the way that we move beyond the threshold, I believe, is absolutely possible. And I think it is. I'm so grateful that sporting industries and all industries where people are aspiring to do something great are going, yes, we want to do great things, but we don't need to break each other in the process. And in fact, if we do break each other in the process, maybe what we're doing is not that great, right? So I love that it's being like spearheaded in a few different areas. And my overall sense is that it's a bit like the bamboo, right? It's a bit like learning to bend but not break. And it's a different type of approach that we have to develop within ourselves. I've had to within myself to go, wow, yes, I'm absolutely committed to going beyond. And for me, my kind of touchstone is, how do I do it like with nature? How do I do it inside of the natural rhythms of myself and life and my family unfolding? So that there might be moments of discomfort, and there might be a night or two of no sleep, or there might be times when I go 10 miles past what I thought I could, but it's all inside of an overall flow of like commitment to being well and being connected along the way. And I think it's a dynamic question.
Yeah. So how do you think that translates into mere mortals in, operating in, I guess there's a spectrum. There's people going about their lives, being in office jobs, various different things. You can look at people leading companies or going on very mission-driven ventures to create new companies. Where's the balance in all of that? So you work with entrepreneurs, for example, like I won't just say the first couple of years, like being an entrepreneur, running any small company is really hard.
Yeah.
I think the initial kind of getting it going is like incredibly challenging. Is there any tools and techniques that you have found useful with some of the people that you're working with around that?
Yeah, there are, and I think just acknowledging what you said, I think in a way we're all mere mortals, right? And I find in the different spheres that I work in some places there's a whole spectrum. Some people are driving themselves way too hard, but I also see a lot of people really underestimating what they're truly capable of. And a lot of us have a ceiling on our willingness to vision what's possible for us. That is I think a important or interesting place to kind of explore simultaneously.
Yeah.
Because I think we have a built-in rule that says if I'm going to go beyond, I'm going to have to work harder, or I'm going to have to drive harder. And I love the idea that actually we can go beyond in a way that is thriving and flourishing. And so that's, I think, the first thing that I think about. And then I think the other is coming back to the notion of the hero's journey. It's one tool or a framework which, for a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people who are starting something new or are taking on something that feels highly aspirational, I find it to be a really helpful framework because it recognizes that in the journey towards anything, there's going to be turning points. And these turning points have been super well studied throughout the ages. And my story might look totally different than your story, but there are some universal points that are probably going to show up. And I've found sharing that framework of the hero's journey and some of the turning points, like the innermost cave, like you said, or even just that. I think for a startup company or for an entrepreneur, one of the most exciting areas to talk about is, we get the call to adventure, so that's, this first big moment in the hero's journey where we feel called towards something, and there's some debate about whether we're going to do it or not, and there's umming and ahhing, and then when we say, okay, we're going, so it's that first step for a seed organization or that first kind of leap. In the mythology, we cross, as you said, from the ordinary world into the extraordinary world of the journey. Sounds really exciting, but for most of us, when we do that, the process of leaving the ordinary world and entering into this new space is totally destabilizing. And we can feel way out of our depth, and we can feel like we are just doing everything we can just to keep our head above water for a time. And to be able to talk to entrepreneurs or someone who's in that space and to show them the map of this is just one stage of the journey is really affirming. Yeah. And then it helps people say, oh, okay, I haven't made the wrong choice. I've actually made the right choice, and this is normal. It's normal to feel tested at this time. And then soon I'm going to become, amidst this time, I'm also meeting mentors, and I'm also meeting allies, and I'm also getting tested. And it sort of kind of gives it a kind of a mythic framework and way, a lens for people to be able to see where they are. Sometimes helping people see a bigger perspective of where they are helps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it makes so much sense, especially with a lot of the companies that have been around, that it's very much, it's a crusade that people are going on. It's very much like a lot of the businesses that have been involved are very mission driven, and it's that idea of a journey and it's a venture. It just resonates, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs. Is there anything within that framework that you kind of iterated on or found need to evolve over the years that you've been working on?
A couple of things, yeah, for sure. I think one thing and this isn't really an iteration, but it's a distinction, I think, particularly in a noble cause, right? So if I'm part of a company that's doing something really important, or if we're all heading towards the Olympics or whatever, it's easy to kind of think of the prize, the company as the journey, and then it's easy to miss the fact that each person has their own journey inside of that. And so creating space for each person to really find themselves in an overall kind of journey or mission, I think is more and more and more important. Maybe there was a time when we would all just sign up to a cause and forget ourselves and just go for it, or an important, organization. But that intrinsic link between the purpose of the company and my personal sense of purpose, or the journey of the company and my journey within it, I think it's really important to be able to acknowledge that each person is on their own journey, right? And to meet them where they are. That's a big one. And I find more and more important, I think even particularly following the last few years, people are more and more sensitive to their own personal antenna, of what feels right for me. And so creating space for that, I think, is really important. And I think the other thing, that, the idea of a hero's journey, two things that people might think originally. One is it's a male thing, and two, it's an individual thing. Yeah. And I think those are two pieces that I've found really important to, they've just iterated and they've expanded, and really important to distinguish with whoever I'm working on it with. It's not a male thing, and we, whether we call it Shiro's or whether we change the way we speak about it, we're speaking about that part of us that's deep inside that feels called towards something deeper and greater. And I think the piece that I love to dance with the most is the realization that it's going to start with, it has to start with just me, and it's, I have my own journey. But then ultimately, for my journey to be fully realized, there's going to be a collective moment, or a part of the journey, and that interplay between the individual and the collective, I think, is a really, really special to explore. And it's often overlooked when we're talking about the hero's journey. It's easy to think just about the person, just the one person.
Yeah. You mentioned as part of this the potential element, so capturing people's potential. And so we get a bunch of people come through who are very connected to the journey that they're on, but we also get some people come through who are just not sure about the journey. They're not sure what that call is, not sure about the purpose, or the connected to meaning. And so how do you work through that? Is there any tools or frameworks that you found useful for people who are trying to connect to that call or to that meaning?
It's great questions. Love it. I think it's a really great and important question. It's interesting because maybe there's never been a time when there's been more permission to find your purpose, and my son, who's 23, I can remember when he was maybe 16 or 17, and he had a few friends who were like really crystal clear about what they wanted to do. And then there was a whole bunch of them that were like, I don't freaking know what I want to do, but there was all this, their teachers and the headmasters and their parents, follow your bliss, find your calling, it's up to you. And that actually can be quite overwhelming. Yeah. And I think one of the big challenges is that people can start to feel like, oh, my purpose has to be one thing, and I have to know it. And like it's, I only like it's just like one thing for the rest of my life. And I think letting people just creating a bit of space around that, and knowing that, my personal belief is the greatest expression of our purpose is, and our potential is really in just who we're being, right? Moment to moment. So that's the greatest expression. And then it's almost like where we choose to focus that, through a job or a passion as a musician or whatever. This is just one expression of that overall sense of purpose. So I think one of the invitations that I give people is just to pick something now. Yeah. Just what's interesting that you, where you feel pulled towards now. Forget about where it's going to go. Forget about whether it's financially viable. Forget about all of these things. If there's an itch there, just like give yourself permission to follow it, right? And if there isn't, that's okay too, right? Like just be where you are and listen, to create space to listen. Yeah,
very cool. It's almost like follow your curiosities, where they're leading, follow that itch, as you said. But I think sometimes people just want, okay, give me the finalized vision of like, I'm here, there, and just speak to people and like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, but
I think
it's like what you kind of, I think most people know what they're interested, what's curious, what they're pulled to, and creating the space to follow that.
I think so. I think so. Because I think there's somehow we've created a lot of pressure to be able to give it in an elevator pitch, to be able to go, my reason for being here is boom, and we have moments and there's aspects of us that are really clear about that, but there's a lot of things in life that enshroud that, right? So sometimes it takes a little while to get there, and then it evolves. I think if I just think about my own journey as a coach, it took me 20 years of coaching before I even called myself a coach. I was totally resistant to it, I kept following it because it felt good, but I never saw it as a path, right?
Yeah.
So
I resonate with that comment big time. Yeah, it's been an interesting one for me personally, just stepping out of being an entrepreneur or being like the athlete or whatever I'm doing to like with Soma, and I've spoken about this before, just stepping into that role as the guide and sharing my experience. And at the start that felt incredibly painful for me, and as though I was kind of like preaching, which I felt very resistant to. But it's something that's continuing to evolve with me.
Can you think of a moment where that kind of like unlocked your ability to just embrace the guide?
Authenticity. And so for me, I think, take Soma for example, a lot of what I was learning about, what I was like sharing was a lot of content, a lot of like new things. It didn't feel like I would come across something and try and translate that. It wasn't authentically that I was utilizing those things in my like everyday life. And so what's changed now, I guess, with the stuff that I'll communicate is that I have to authentically be utilizing that in my everyday life. It has to be a tool. It has to be part of my framework. It can't be just something that I read in a book that I'm just trying to translate. I have to be putting it into practice.
Yeah, nice.
And so when I feel like I'm speaking authentically about that, then it just translates and I can connect with people. When I'm trying to talk about a Stoic principle that Marcus Aurelius might have felt was important to him, and just trying to translate that, I felt like I was bullshitting a little bit, and that kind of goes against my grain a little bit.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, and it's interesting, isn't it, how effortless it is to speak from something that you have a genuine embodied experience of. And then you don't have to do anything but be yourself in that moment, and people feel it, huh?
Yeah. So that's a nice segue to just change gears into the next area of Chip's career, the one of storytelling. So as I've mentioned to you, the calling to write a book, either some of the learnings that I can pass on to my kids or some of the people that I'm connected to with Soma, has been itching at me, I guess. And so you have wrote a screenplay. You also wrote a children's book. So I'm intrigued to learn about some of the tools and techniques that have been useful in your just experience as a writer as well. So I want to go there.
Beautiful. Well, I actually have a book for you in the car, which the book I wrote before the children's book is a book called Writing the Story Within.
Yes,
right.
You did,
So it's a book which actually dives into the process of writing. It's maybe a little bit in the same vein as The Artist's Way, as it's kind of a journey book itself, but it's really specifically focused around the writing craft.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, so that might be helpful.
So how did you go from athlete to writer? Or
Yeah, well, I can say there's like the I guess maybe there's the formal way, and then there's maybe the synchronistical way. So I think writing is something I've done like forever. Like I think if there's one thing that's been really consistent for me as a practice since I was like 8, it's been writing. You know, almost every day, at least in a journal. I've always just loved story. And so that's always been quite in me. And even, you know, when I was an athlete, when I was coaching, I always had a real deep passion for film and story. So I was studying film and filmmaking and screenwriting and everything. So that was sort of a parallel element of me. And interestingly, kind of two things happened. One, I would normally spend a bit of time working on a writing project, and then I would go back to coaching for a little while. It's kind of in the early days of this, and really interested before I discovered the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell's work. I kind of quite organically just started to notice when I was working with humans on something, some of these patterns, and then I would go and work in the realms of story for a little while, and I would be like, oh man, the same patterns are over there. And it was really interesting to kind of go back and forth between kind of areas of human endeavor and then conjuring up characters and things. And then when I bumped into the work of Joseph Campbell, I was like, whoa, wow, he's just completely captured what I've experienced to be true. These patterns are showing up of what enables someone in the sporting realm or the business realm to be their best. They're the same kind of patterns that are showing up for Shrek when he's moving from being the swamp ogre to, you know, the savior of the day, you know? And so there was always a kind of a loose interplay between those spaces for me. But the kind of a funny story, I guess, during the time when I was coaching the Australian Olympic team, for some reason, my business was set up in the U.S., so they never got me a working visa. I was traveling so much. I think it just thought it was easier. I just came in and out as a tourist, and even when I was effectively working for the government, like the Australian funded Olympic Committee, right? But so every time I would come into the country, I would have to fill out my little customs form and say what my profession was. And I, right from the very beginning, I just started writing that I was a writer. And often when I would come through customs, the customs officer would say, oh, you're a writer. What are you working on? Or what are you doing? And I would find myself talking about stories that I was writing. And sometimes I was just completely making it up to get it through customs. And then sometimes I was actually working on a story. But kind of over that 4-year period, I had so many conversations where I was telling people that I was a writer and that I was working on films and stuff. And I don't know, there's no formal link, but within 6 months after finishing with the Australian Olympic program, I somehow found myself as the head writer and a director inside of a little firm in Melbourne that was producing pilots for TV. And so I just kind of got a crash course dive in, and was somehow empowered to produce pilots for television, and it ultimately led me into my first screenwriting project and meeting the director of One Perfect Day, but that was the first film was really, I would say, more and more a convergence of people. So I just really connected so deeply with the director, and we had a really strong connection around the story that he was trying to write, and it just evolved really naturally until I became the head writer of the project, and then went on to work on the next project as well. So
you committed to it. So the lesson is here: start writing it on your forms, and you'll evolve into it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, proceed as though it's happening.
Yeah. Nice. And so, so you actually have written a book to actually help people communicate their thoughts and feelings through word. What are some of the tools, like, because you mentioned that you have historically had a practice of writing that you've always had. Like, what benefits do you think there are to the average person of having a daily writing practice and benefiting from that?
Yeah, great. I mean, it's actually a challenge I give a lot of the leaders that I work with now. I can speak from my personal experience. One of the primary benefits for me is I feel like just taking a little bit of time to write with no agenda in the day, but just to write authentically with where I'm at, whatever's going on for me. There's often a really interesting kind of translation that happens or migration that happens where I might write for a period of time about something, and I'm writing whatever it is that I'm thinking about consciously, and during the period of the writing, the kind of the voice of the writer starts to change until I'm writing to myself about that thing. And it seems to be for me a kind of a doorway into a deeper voice within me to help get perspective around different aspects of life or whatever. So as a practice, as a personal practice for gaining clarity and taking ideas that might be swimming around in our mind about life or creativity and just moving them, there's something about moving them out of our mind and onto the page that helps them to evolve and to reveal themselves more powerfully, I find.
Yeah. And so you actually utilize that with the people that you work with, the leaders that you're working with?
Quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. And sometimes it's just a recommended practice or a challenge I might give them. Or sometimes if we're in a big workshop, there might be a few moments where I'm looking for a deep conversation with the group, or it's time for them to move into an area, and we might start with some reflective writing to kind of just let people crack into a deeper place in their thinking about an idea. Because sometimes if you just throw a big idea into the space, people might kind of freeze or not be a bit reluctant to kind of speak up first. Whereas if once they start moving the idea, then they start to feel a bit more confident in it, and they kind of take it downstream a little bit.
Yeah. With your writing, you wrote the screenplay, but you also wrote the children's book. Like, was there a catalyst for that? Like, what drew you to write for children?
Really, it was a story so my son Josh, who's 23 now, our nighttime ritual, as a lot of fathers, was, we had a very active story time, and a lot of the sometimes we would read, but mostly he was really interested. He just wanted to be told a story. And so it really challenged me, that was one of the greatest catalysts for the storyteller in me. And sometimes they were, I'm sure many fathers or mothers who are listening to this would have this experience. Sometimes it might be just a story that lasts 10 minutes, and sometimes it might be a whole saga that opens up over, a month or two or three. And so the story that became the children's book was one of the stories that was a bit of a saga for Josh and I, and it kind of captured some principles of life and intentionality, and working with the forces of nature, and in a kind of a fun story that helps put him to sleep. And then several years later, my publisher asked if I had any children's book ideas, and I was like, well, yeah, I've got a handful, and that was the first one that popped out.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
very nice. Yeah, I've currently need to iterate on the story of Santa Claus, our Father Christmas. My 2-year-old daughter is obsessed with ho ho ho, as she calls him.
Right.
And she literally every night at the moment she wants a story about Santa Claus.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, it's great you have access to the hero's journey as a framework. It's very useful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So to bring things back together. So today you've taken all of this experience, all this wide variety of experience that you've had, and your focus today is primarily on coaching. How can people find you and what sort of clients that you're working with, and how can people connect with you?
I can say now that I'm a coach. And for years after coaching athletes, I really tried to do a lot of other things, but it didn't matter what I got hired for. Within a day or two, I was sort of in the director's office coaching. And so I finally went, okay, this is one thing life wants me to do, so I'm going to do it. I work with mostly right now with organizations, and they range from 3 or 4 person startups to, 50,000 person giant enterprises. But I would say the common thread is most of them are trying to do something new. They're trying to go beyond what the past would have said was possible in their arena. And probably I'm gravitated towards or magnetized towards those spaces, maybe because of my history, but and my fascination with how do we do that without blowing things up. So oftentimes it starts very close with a small group of leaders, but ultimately for the work to really be effective, it will often cascade, it needs to cascade across every cell in the organism. So the work, ranges from very focused one-on-one work to quite large scale workshops and curriculums and kind of rollouts of vision and mission and purpose, through the layers of an organization. So best way to find me, probably my website, which is chiprichards.global. Or you can email me at cr@chiprichards.global, and it'll come straight to me.
There you go.
Yeah.
Genius. Amazing. Well, Chip, that's been so incredible to sit down and pick your brains and explore your experience. And as you said before, we've been meeting you for like half an hour. I felt like I'd known you forever.
Yeah.
There was definitely a strong connection and a strong bond, and I only feel that even more after sitting down with you. So thank you so much, and appreciate your time.
Oh, it's a total honor and a total pleasure. And I really, as I said, feel like you're a brother. And interestingly, I think in the last 6 months, more and more, there's been a lot of my clients, less and less, are asking me to come into their boardroom, more and more asking, can we come up somewhere into the hinterland and have a few days together? And so I feel truly gifted to have met you and the team, and look forward to the opportunity to explore more together in the coming days.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.